explorers have just discovered $50 trillion in treasure buried beneath the ice of Antarctica.
The world's southernmost and iciest continent holds abundance of hidden minerals and even energy sources.
This untouched land harbors a huge fortune in minerals and metals, sealed by the freezing cold and strict international laws.
54 nations have now signed the treaty which bans mining and militarization of the continent.
These regulations, established by the Antarctic Treaty, were intended to protect this pristine wilderness exclusively for scientific purposes, not for mining. But who is really watching when greed overtakes the entire continent? Let us reveal what happens as greedy eyes turn toward this frozen treasure, teetering on the brink of a dangerous breakdown.
Audit committee says that reserves totaling 511 billion barrels has been reported.
The fragile treaty protecting Antarctica's untapped resources. Originally, Antarctica was a place where any country could set up a presence if they chose to. The region's extremely harsh temperatures, perilous ice conditions, and its isolation deterred many from making the attempt. However, some were not put off by these challenges. By the 1950s, interest in the continent grew as more countries began to establish research stations there. These stations were not only for the purpose of scientific exploration, but also served as a means for nations to demonstrate their power. 7 countries, Norway, Australia, France, New Zealand, Chile, Argentina, and Britain, made official territorial claims on parts of Antarctica. These claims often overlapped with each other, leading to a tangled and complicated geopolitical landscape. In addition to these nations, both the United States and the Soviet Union decided to establish their own bases on the continent. Part of their motivation was strategic. By building these stations and staffing them with researchers, they could showcase their technological and logistical prowess, extending their reach into this far-flung territory. This presence on the continent was as much about asserting dominance as it was about conducting scientific research. Despite the presence of individual research stations which were able to maintain a degree of order, the broader governance of Antarctica was based on a loose and informal set of agreements among the nations involved. These countries committed themselves to abide by the provisions of a treaty that prohibits military activities and the extraction of minerals. This treaty system is somewhat delicate, functioning primarily on the basis of mutual respect and understanding among the nations, rather than through any strongly enforceable legal measures. This informal agreement helps to manage the interactions and activities on the continent, ensuring that peace and scientific inquiry can continue despite the complex claims and interests involved. As it stands, Antarctica serves as a global commons, a shared space dedicated to peace and research. Yet, this balance is delicate, with the potential for disruption always present if international relations were to sour, or if the lure of untapped resources becomes too great. The continent's fate hangs in the balance, safeguarded by an agreement that is as vulnerable as it is vital. During Eisenhower's presidency, a strategic plan was developed, aimed not only at preventing the Soviet Union from staking a claim in Antarctica, but also at promoting a global political strategy under the guise of peaceful diplomacy. This initiative was about blocking the Soviets from planting their flag and possibly setting up a simple station like one for monitoring weather. Equally, it was about advancing ideas of post-war diplomacy, which involved resolving global conflicts through discussions and agreements rather than warfare. This approach emphasized the protection of human rights and adherence to the law, taking a firm stand against oppressive governments, even if it involved a remote and largely uninhabitable area like Antarctica. Eisenhower was a key proponent of these diplomatic ideals and was actively involved in efforts to keep Antarctica a zone free from military and political conflicts. Against this backdrop, tough negotiations took place, involving representatives from the 7 nations that had laid claims to parts of Antarctica, as well as from the US, Soviet Union, Japan, Belgium, and South Africa. These negotiations, which occurred in over 40 different meetings, were filled with intense disagreements. The main points of contention were between countries that wanted to maintain their territorial claims and those that were open to the idea of placing the region under international control. After much debate, a treaty was formulated in December 1959 and took 2 more years to be fully approved, with Chile and Argentina being the last to sign. This treaty prohibited any actions that would assert, support, or dispute a claim to territorial ownership in Antarctica. Thus, all claims to this frozen land were effectively put on hold indefinitely. Despite this treaty, disagreements continued. Beneath the surface of this agreement meant to foster international cooperation, low-level disputes still simmered over who actually held authority over the icy stretches of Antarctica. These persistent disagreements highlighted the stark difference between the high-minded ideals of global cooperation and the underlying realities of national self-interest and strategic maneuvering. Even within this so-called peaceful agreement, the complexities of political ambitions and global strategies were evident, showcasing that even in the most desolate parts of the world, political and territorial ambitions can stir significant tension and conflict. Now, Antarctica becomes a cold battleground for global powers. Nations tug of war over a frozen continent. In the huge icy wilderness of Antarctica, nations quietly fought over who owned the land, a place thought to be full of untapped resources and, strangely, possible sites for future settlements. Despite international deals to maintain peace and foster research, some countries, such as Australia and New Zealand, were busy charting the territory, hoping that detailed maps dotted with their flags would solidify their claims. The Soviets, on the other hand, left a more obvious mark by naming a large area the Soviet Plateau, making it clear who named it. Countries competed in sending researchers to the frozen landscape under the guise of scientific advancement, though this often seemed more about national pride. Some tried to promote tourism, but interest waned, especially after a tragic event where a plane from New Zealand crashed on Mount Erebus, killing everyone on board. Other nations resorted to unique tactics, like issuing special stamps, or in the case of the US, constructing a nuclear reactor at McMurdo Station. The UK even once considered the drastic measure of setting off a hydrogen bomb on the ice to prove their dominance. However, Argentina took their claims to an extreme level, greatly upset by what they saw as a club of wealthy countries taking over what they considered an extension of their own land. Argentina officially made Argentine Antarctica a part of their Tierra del Fuego province and didn't just stop at symbolic acts like flag planting. They actually engaged in a small armed conflict with Britain at Hope Bay in 1952, set up a commemorative plaque to declare the ongoing nature of their claim, and even built mock settlements. Argentina's efforts to assert their sovereignty reached dramatic levels when government leaders gave speeches there, and they orchestrated a highly symbolic event by flying in the pregnant wife of a base commander to give birth to the first person native to Antarctica, aiming to plant not just flags but roots. All these actions, from practical to the downright absurd, showcase a stark and somewhat darkly amusing tale of human ambition and the extents to which countries will go to claim a piece of one of the most challenging and unwelcoming areas on Earth. This story of competition and extravagant claims reveals much about the complexities and peculiarities of national interests in the icy continent. Amelo Palma arrived in Antarctica. During this era, countries were eager to mark their territories not just for the sake of ownership, but to uncover and exploit the valuable resources hidden beneath the ice. The process of mapping and studying the land, officially for understanding its geology, was often a guise for more strategic and resource-driven ambitions. While Antarctica was supposed to be a pristine natural reserve for scientific study, the hidden agenda for many was the wealth that lay underground. New Zealand had earlier tried to examine its section, known as the Ross Dependency, in the late 1950s, but found nothing that could help the country economically or strategically. However, the global oil crisis in 1973, which saw oil-producing countries stopping their supply to many Western nations, intensified the race to find new sources of oil. This crisis didn't just affect fuel availability, it spurred a desperate search for oil reserves, turning distant and harsh territories like Antarctica into areas of intense interest. Responding to the crisis, the United States drilled over 50 locations across the continent, hoping to discover a stable oil supply. Around the same time, both American and Japanese vessels, the USS Glomar Challenger and the Haku Maru, were deployed to explore for petroleum deposits. This turned the cold and remote waters around Antarctica into hotspots of activity driven by national interests and the global demand for oil. The continent's richness wasn't just in potential oil. The Larsman Hills and other areas like the Antarctic Peninsula and the South Shetland Islands were rich in metals. Over 40 research stations were established by 18 different nations in these metal-rich regions, indicating the growing strategic importance of these areas. This significant increase in the number of stations underscored the continent's role not merely as a site for scientific inquiry, but as a valuable asset in the geopolitical arena. The Antarctic Treaty, which was agreed upon by over 50 nations, was initially celebrated as a commitment to peace and scientific research. However, as activities intensified, it became clear that the treaty was also a battleground for countries vying for mineral rights. The critical question arose: who deserves to profit from these resources? Should it be the country that first finds them, the one that manages to extract them, or the one under whose territory the resources are found? As interests deepen, the race for Antarctica's hidden riches heats up. Geopolitics and massive greed in the Antarctic. This led to intense lobbying, particularly by New Zealand mining companies, which argued that those who invest in mining should exclusively benefit from the resources. Meanwhile, smaller nations and those not part of the treaty advocated for a more equitable distribution of resources. They suggested that the riches extracted from Antarctica should be used to help reduce the disparities in resource availability globally. This struggle over Antarctic resources revealed a stark reality. The continent was being viewed not just as a last frontier for exploration and conservation, but as a chessboard for geopolitical maneuvering. Each nation's move was calculated not just with an eye towards scientific achievement, but for economic and strategic gains. As countries continued to explore and exploit, the ideals of cooperation and environmental protection often seemed secondary to the urgent demands of national interests and global economics. The race for Antarctic resources laid bare the complexities and often contradictory nature of human endeavors on this distant, icy continent. The meeting held in Wellington wasn't about stopping mining in Antarctica. Rather, it was about setting the rules for it. The Convention on the Regulation of Antarctic Mineral Resource Activities was crafted to manage how nations could mine the continent without harming it too much. It was clearly a plan to allow mining while trying to look responsible about the environment. They decided that since countries really wanted to mine, it was better to control how it was done instead of banning it completely. Despite this plan, Australia and France chose not to agree to the convention, influenced by strong public opposition that demanded a focus on preserving Antarctica's untouched environment. This push for conservation gained more strength after the Exxon Valdez oil spill in 1989, which was a disastrous oil spill that made many people see the dangers of prioritizing economic benefits over the health of our planet. This shift in public sentiment led to the adoption of the Madrid Protocol, which took a very different approach compared to CRAMRA. This new agreement completely banned mining in Antarctica, aiming to keep the continent untouched and dedicated to peace and scientific research. It included strict rules to minimize human impact, such as the requirement to collect human waste in bottles to avoid contaminating the environment. The protocol, which started to be enforced in 1991 and became fully effective in 1998, was a significant achievement for those who wanted to protect the continent's pristine condition. However, the commitment to preserve Antarctica is now being tested. Recent discoveries by Russia of extensive oil reserves under the Antarctic Peninsula have put the treaty under pressure. These findings suggest there are over 500 billion barrels of oil, nearly twice as much as Saudi Arabia's reserves, and this has immense economic implications. At current oil prices, this could mean about $50 trillion worth of oil lies beneath the ice. Beyond oil, Antarctica is also known to contain other valuable resources. There are large deposits of coal in the Transantarctic Mountains, iron in the Prince Charles Mountains, and valuable metals like gold and silver in the Queen Maud and Queen Elizabeth lands. Other important minerals like boron, phosphorus, uranium in the Larsman Hills, and low-cost copper types on the peninsula further increase the potential wealth of the continent. The debate over these resources underscores a fundamental conflict. The Madrid Protocol emphasizes environmental protection and maintaining Antarctica for peaceful purposes. Yet, the continent's untapped resources continue to draw attention from countries around the world. The tension between the desire to exploit these resources for economic reasons and the need to preserve one of the last untouched places on Earth highlights the ongoing struggle between economic interests and environmental ethics. This ongoing situation puts into question how long the commitment to protecting Antarctica can hold against the lure of such economic benefits. The global community faces a pivotal decision: continue to uphold the values of conservation and scientific exploration, or give in to the immense economic pressures that beckon beneath the ice. Russia is the sole nation openly searching for valuable minerals beneath the snow. They claim to be conducting scientific research to adhere to international agreements, specifically the Madrid Protocol 2021, which aims to regulate such activities. By 2030, Russia plans to examine the land to understand its mineral potential thoroughly. In the icy silence, global strategies and hidden ambitions clash. The thin line between research and exploitation. Though presented as scientific, this pursuit is deeply intertwined with Russia's geopolitical ambitions. Significant oil reserves were identified by the state-run company Rosgeo, not a private company seeking profit. This points to a strategic, not merely commercial motivation. However, according to the rules set by the Antarctic Treaty, mining for minerals is strictly forbidden. Russia circumvents this by labeling their activities as research, which allows them to toe the line without overtly breaking the rules. Russia's approach cleverly avoids significant international backlash. Prospecting for oil seems relatively minor in the broader context of their international behavior. Thus, the global community has not focused heavily on these activities. But does this mean Russia can proceed with actual extraction? Certainly not. Despite reports showcasing high-tech visuals of huge oil reserves, the reality is less promising. Russia's findings suggest that there is indeed oil, but most of it lies beneath extensive layers of ice, covering 98% of the continent. The accessible areas are limited, about as large as the state of Colorado, which is a minimal fraction of the entire continent. The portrayal of easily accessible wealth is misleading. The extreme conditions of Antarctica make any potential oil extraction both impractical and unprofitable. While Russia continues to explore, the harsh environmental realities ensure that the supposed wealth remains locked under ice, unreachable, and economically unviable. Thus, the image of Russia as a pioneer in Antarctic mining is more a reflection of ambition than feasible reality, as the continent remains largely inhospitable and resistant to human exploitation. Antarctica is an extremely challenging place for any kind of work. Frequent, powerful blizzards reduce visibility to zero, making it very difficult to operate. Even worse, huge icebergs roam unpredictably across the seas, creating a hazardous environment for shipping and transport. On land, the situation is just as grim. The ice can be as thick as about 3 miles, and it constantly shifts, moving up to nearly 1 mile every year along the coasts. This movement could easily destroy any structures like oil wells or mining operations, leading to potentially disastrous oil spills. Adding to the difficulty, there is no local workforce. Anyone willing to work in such a harsh setting would have to be paid a very high salary to compensate for the extreme conditions. The continent's isolation compounds the issue. It is over 1,860 miles from Buenos Aires and over 2,485 miles from Cape Town. This distance makes transporting workers and supplies a massive challenge. Without any existing infrastructure to support industrial activities, the cost of starting operations like mining is prohibitively high. From a financial standpoint, these obstacles make any potential mining economically unfeasible. The numbers just don't add up unless oil prices are extraordinarily high, around $150 to $200 a barrel. With oil prices typically much lower, attempting to extract resources from this remote wilderness doesn't make sense from a business perspective. Moreover, even considering these ventures runs counter to legal restrictions. Mining or extracting oil in Antarctica is against international law designed to protect the continent's pristine environment. Yet, there are reports of countries, particularly Russia, whose fleets have been known to operate outside the law, engaging in smuggling and illegal fishing. These activities suggest a willingness to exploit the region's resources despite the prohibitions. However, even for these operators, the high costs and low returns make such ventures unattractive. Let's clarify a common misunderstanding. Mineral deposits are not the same as reserves. A mineral deposit just means there's something valuable under the ground. In contrast, a reserve is when this value can be accessed and used because it's economically viable. This distinction is crucial when discussing the frozen oil fields of Antarctica compared to Saudi Arabia's ready-to-use oil reserves. The buried oil in Antarctica isn't being tapped anytime soon. Why? Because extracting it doesn't make financial sense right now. To grasp the financial implications, consider how oil economics work in the United States. Did America really lose 1/5 of its oil in 2020? No. What happened was the value of extracting that oil dropped as the price of oil halved, making it not worth the effort to get it. Did America's oil resources magically double over 15 years? No, but advances in fracking technology allowed us to extract more oil from previously unprofitable sources. The amount of oil underground didn't increase, our ability to get it did. Turning from the icy depths to harsh realities, the focus shifts to the true costs of Antarctic exploration. Nations eye Antarctica's untapped reserves. When John Kingston of the U.S. Geological Survey analyzed potential oil reserves in Antarctica in 1992, he speculated that there could be up to 19 billion barrels of accessible oil if conditions were right, or only 6 billion if it was harder to extract. This might place Antarctica on the oil map, ranking between Norway and Qatar. However, these are hypothetical scenarios. The true potential of Antarctic oil remains locked away because the technology and economics don't support its extraction yet. This introduces a significant problem when dealing with natural resources. Just because we know there's something valuable under the ground doesn't mean it's feasible to get it. The extreme conditions of Antarctica add another layer of difficulty, pushing the cost higher than the potential profit. Until extracting oil from such challenging environments becomes cheaper or the price of oil increases significantly, those giant reserves will remain just numbers on paper, intriguing but impractical. This reality underscores a larger issue in resource management. Economic viability is as important as the physical existence of the resource. As technologies develop and economic circumstances change, what is now seen as inaccessible could become the next big production site. But for now, Antarctica's oil is more of a financial challenge than an opportunity, illustrating the delicate balance between knowing what's underground and being able to profit from it. The potential of untapped oil in Antarctica is a big draw for major countries, even though agreements like the Madrid Protocol are meant to protect this untouched land forever. But realistically, by 2048, discussions could open to change or even discard these international commitments. 24 years might seem far, but debates will likely heat up around whether to destroy the treaty and begin exploiting Antarctica's resources. Environmental rules have currently marked the RWC region off-limits for commercial fishing, but these could also be overturned. Given the difficulty and high costs involved, the oil hidden under the ice might not seem valuable enough to pursue right now. But for powerhouse nations like China and India, securing a steady energy supply for their fast-growing economies is crucial. Moreover, the placement of research stations across Antarctica by the United States, China, India, and Russia raises questions. These stations are officially for scientific research, but they could also serve strategic purposes in a broader resource game. With the United States and China locked in trade tensions and similar strain between India and China, these research outposts might serve dual purposes beyond mere science. As 2048 nears, it's not just about whether the treaty can endure. It's about who will be the first to act in this strategic contest over a remote yet vitally important part of the world. This looming decision has the potential to reshape alliances, ignite regional tensions, and fundamentally alter the global balance of power as nations vie for dominance over Antarctica's icy expanse. The outcome could redefine not only territorial rights, but also the environmental fate of one of the planet's last great wildernesses. Trade across Western countries has seen significant growth, while the powerful nations have boldly ignored the standard practices of international trade. These countries have generously supported their own businesses with subsidies and tax breaks, all except for Europe, which hasn't followed this trend. As a result, trade relations are becoming strained, and we are moving toward a world where countries are more nationalistic and protective of their own interests. It's becoming increasingly common for countries to prefer controlling their own resources over relying on imports. China, for example, might decide to extract its own oil from Antarctica rather than relying on foreign oil. Similarly, instead of purchasing copper from Chile, India might choose to establish its own copper mine in the southern hemisphere. This shift towards self-sufficiency often means disregarding long-standing international agreements and damaging pristine environments such as Antarctica. The Antarctic Treaty, designed to promote international cooperation after World War II, seems outdated in today's climate where trust is fading and trade is viewed not as a chance for mutual gain, but as a competitive struggle. As we approach the year 2048, it's increasingly likely that countries will begin drilling in Antarctica, despite it not being cost-effective. This is fueled by large oil companies that often exaggerate the potential of undiscovered oil fields, promoting a narrative of abundance that can lead to overlooking the environmental and social impacts. These tales of giant, untouched resources can divert attention from the harmful effects on small, vulnerable areas. In an environment where global cooperation is waning, the potential for conflict over resources like oil and copper is rising. Nations are more inclined to act independently to secure their economic interests, often at the expense of global harmony and environmental preservation. This self-centered approach risks significant long-term consequences for international relations and the natural world. If you are interested in understanding more about how such scenarios have negatively affected smaller regions in the past, consider exploring related content I have produced. This includes discussions on the environmental and economic repercussions faced by small island nations caught in the crossfire of these global ambitions. As the race for Antarctica's resources intensifies, how far are we willing to go, risking environmental disaster? Like, comment, and subscribe for more.